And welcome all of you to the Sunday Times Business Times Top 100 Companies 2016. My name is, as you heard, Nick Rabinowitz. I will be your host for this most prestigious event on the business calendar. Host, of course, is an English word for program director, which is a Xhosa word for MC. You may call me Nick. I have a Xhosa name as well, Unik. White people, I'm just saying hi. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa's leading and largest business publication has gathered all of you captains of industry, economic giants, financial Spartans, I'm just talking about the wives, with the intention of honoring the winners of the Sunday Times Business Times Top 100 Companies Awards, presented for the 4th time with Johnny Walker. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Johnny. Before we proceed, I have a number of housekeeping issues. Firstly, the bathrooms are out there, and I think they're to the left, and probably to the right as well. Not in any mysterious places. Just look for the man or the woman sign, like everywhere else. Please don't bother with switching off your cell phones. No one has done that since the Nokia. You may put them on silent. If somebody calls, ignore that call, okay? Minister Gordon, I'm sure Sean Abrahams will get back to you. Oh, so a smattering of applause, that's good. I was wondering to myself this morning, I thought to myself, because being Jewish, I'm not sure about these things, but I think Sean Abrahams may be Catholic, because it seems he withdraws too late and is then left to deal with the consequences, although he doesn't confess afterwards. So maybe he's Jewish, Abrahams. Maybe this is a Jew. Adrian Gore, help me out. Where are you? I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, the smoking area is the Greyston Drive on-ramp to the M1. However, special dispensation has been made for selected pipe smokers. At table 9. I would also like to remind you, please don't pay any attention to the undercover NPA agents dressed as waiters. They're just here in the hopes that one of our VIP politicians accidentally commits a felony during his speech. It's getting a little desperate. Right, also in the light of the recent water restrictions, Johnny Walker urges you to drink your whiskey neat and do not use a hose pipe. Right, so that is the unofficial welcome. For the official welcome you officially, as well as welcome our guest speaker and former president, because, well, I was meant to do that, but they decided probably wisely not to give that job to the comedian. So, this man always appears in a bow tie. I hope he's wearing one tonight. If you remember the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he is Carlton with a Twitter account. Now, his Twitter profile actually says news junkie, writer, journalist, newspaper editor, husband, father, son, brother, uncle, nephew, Kaizer Chiefs fan, and wait for it, former ESCOM employee, but he assures us he's never been anywhere near Saxonwold. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the editor of the Sunday Times in Mfana waseMonti, uBongani Sikoko.
It gives me great pleasure to stand here and welcome you to tonight's function. As Nick has said, later on we will have the honor of having former President of the Republic of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, as our guest speaker. Also gracing us with their presence tonight, former Finance Minister and Deputy Chairman of Rothschild, Mr. Trevor Manuel. We also have the Executive Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Mr. Herman Mashaba. He's also joined by his counterpart from the City of Tshwane, Executive Mayor Soli Msimanga. The current Finance Minister, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, is also in the house. He's amongst us. Also, please welcome Dr. Johan Rupert, the Chairman of Richmond. And because I have to sing for my supper, my CEO, Mr. Enru Bonamo. I would like to take this time as well and acknowledge the captains of industry, entrepreneurs and CEOs of some of our top companies that are also present here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, this time of the year provides us with an opportunity to step back and reflect on how far we have come. So the next few weeks will invite us to reflect and set new goals for ourselves. Year 2016 will without a doubt go down as one South Africans will want to forget. As we reflect, we are likely to agree with the dominant sentiment that this is possibly the most turbulent, if not the worst, in our 22 years of democratic rule. Of course, that is debatable, but the events of the recent months do support this sentiment. During this period, we have seen an unprecedented outpouring of outrage, resentment, of anger, and growing support for calls for ordinary South Africans to stand in the gap and defend the Constitution. There have also been calls for South Africans to stand up against the forces that have launched an attack on the National Treasury and to raise their voices in protest against the abuse of state resources and institutions. This is all the more pressing given that we are now just a matter of weeks from a possible descent in sub-investment grade or junk by the world's leading ratings agencies. Such a fall would prove disastrous, not only for the people sitting in this dining hall tonight, but for the people that will be cleaning it after we end tonight's festivities. What the events of this year have, however, proved is the trust deficit that exists between business, government, and labor. If we are to either avoid a junk rating by this Christmas, or indeed to emerge from one, we have to confront this reality. There's no beating about the bush. The only way to get this economy off its feet is to mend these fences. In truth, growth under 1% in a developing country such as ours is no growth at all. Just last week, some of you were among thousands of South Africans who converged on the capital alongside political parties, civil society movements, religious and business organizations that gathered to say no to what has come to be known as state capture and against the assault on institutions of state. Also in recent months, we have seen some of you launching the CEO initiative, which was formed to strengthen our economy and to attempt to avert a ratings downgrade after President Jacob Zuma axed former Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene at the end of last year. Lastly, we've seen growing calls for President Jacob Zuma to resign or be removed from office. And these are growing by the day. As a newspaperman, I cannot say I am complaining. This year has been like a minefield for journalists. as our readers just cannot have enough of the two dominant stories of 2016, hashtag fees must fall and state capture. These stories have provided the Sunday Times with an opportunity to redeem itself and regain its rightful position as the first and final word on the South African story. I am happy with how we have covered and owned the reporting of state capture, which is perhaps the bigger feature in 2016. In our reporting of this story, we have told you how Deputy Minister Finance Mcebisi Jonas had been offered the position of Finance Minister while Mr. Nene was still in office. It was us who told you about one Mr. Themba Maseko and how he lost his job as head of government communications after he refused to channel government media buying budget to media platforms owned by a certain controversial family, not very far from a Shibin in Saxon World. Then, of course, there was the mystery trip by Ministers Des van Rooyen and Mosebenzi Zwane to Dubai while the controversial family were there. These were some of the very first stories in our 7-month-long series on state capture. It was important for the Sunday Times to take the lead in how this story was reported. Was so excited that our reporting led to complaints being filed with the public protector, and after an investigation, her state of capture report was released last week. We believe that this is a role that a newspaper like the Sunday Times should be playing. But in a developing democracy like ours, institutions like the Sunday Times have a far bigger role to play. While we play our watchdog role very well, it is not enough. Over and above this role, there is a need for the Sunday Times to assume another role. I call this new role the guide dog role. This is where we not only watch and report about what is wrong and what is happening in our country, but we provide platforms for South Africans to debate and find solutions to some of these challenges that are facing our country. One of the biggest challenges that are facing us as we sit here is the growing youth unemployment. While we all agree that this is a ticking time bomb, if we do nothing about it and just sit and discuss it, it will explode. This is why in the first few months of the new year, we will be approaching you and your companies with a proposal to partner with us to get young people into jobs, learnerships, and internships. This will be us trying to perfect our new role of being a guide dog, where we do not just point to where the problems are, but we help find solutions to those problems. With those few words, welcome to everyone. Please enjoy the evening. Thank you.
A clear voice in good times and bad, acknowledging the moments that bring us together and make us who we are. Telling the stories that shape the country, our world. After 110 years of cutting-edge award-winning reporting, still the benchmark of thought leadership and innovation. Sunday Times, the paper for the people.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you stand with me in welcoming Thabo Mbeki, the former President of the Republic of South Africa.
the Master of Ceremonies. Yeah, I want to acknowledge you, Nick. So, and Mr. Editor Bongani Skogo, business leaders, Minister Pravin Gordon, mayors Johannesburg and Tshwane, Trevor, Ivan Rupert. Who else should I acknowledge? I think I've acknowledged everybody, haven't I? And I trust you will bear with me as I begin my comments today by referring to elements of our past. When I delivered the State of the Nation address in 1999, I said, among other things, that steadily the dark clouds of despair are lifting, giving way to our season of hope. That our country, which for centuries had bled from 1,000 wounds, is progressing towards its healing. That the continuing process of social and national emancipation, to which we are all subject, constitutes an evolving act of self-definition. And that at the dawn of a new life, our practical actions must ensure that none can challenge us when we say we're a nation at work to build a better life. And said, if by word and deed we take our places among the ordinary people who position themselves among a nation that is at work to build a better life for all within a caring society, then we should expect that the poor of our world will then set a garland of grace on our heads and present each and every one of us with a crown of splendor. And 10 years ago, in 2006, in a similar State of the Nation address, I said that though it would take time to eradicate the legacy of colonialism and apartheid, we do not think our progress fits the description captured in these words in Shakespeare's Macbeth, that tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. And I went on to say we have known that it would take considerable time before we could say that we've eradicated the legacy of the past. And we've expected that the circumstances handed down to us by our history would indeed condemn us to a petty pace of progress towards the achievement of the goal of a better life for all. And yet I feel emboldened to appropriate for our people the promise contained in the book of the prophet Isaiah, when the book says that God said, "For you shall go out with joy and be led out in peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress tree, and instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle tree." And to explain that, I said this year opened, that was 2006, with the inspiring news that our people were highly optimistic about their future and the future of our country, ranking 8th in the world on the Optimism Index. That Gallup poll, which issued this report, said we have 3 times more optimists than pessimists, that the optimism figure had doubled even since 2002. And said that the results obtained by Gallup International have been confirmed by a recent domestic poll conducted by Makino. And according to this poll, 65% of our people believe that the country is going in the right direction. At 84% think that our country holds out a happy future for all racial groups. That 71% believe the government is performing well. And said with regard to the economy, late last month, it was January 2006, the Grant Thornton International Business Owners Survey reported that 84% of South Africa's business owners are optimistic about the year ahead. making them the third most optimistic internationally. Again, last month, the First National Bank and the Bureau of Economic Research reported that the Consumer Confidence Index is at its highest in 25 years. And said what all of these figures signify is that our people are firmly convinced, firmly convinced then, that our country has entered its age of hope. And they are convinced that we have created the conditions to achieve more rapid progress towards the realization of their dreams. And they are certain that we are indeed a winning nation, unquote. As you have seen, I've quoted statements I made 17 and 10 years ago, respectively. Again, as you will have heard, the statement spoke of an age of hope, of high levels of optimism about the future, among all sectors of our population, of a time when the mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before us, and of a new period in our national reality when our yesterdays would no longer light fools the way to dusty death. However, the hard reality we face today is that our country is trapped in a general and deepening political, economic, and social crisis, which has, for many, begun to turn what was an age of hope into an age of despair. It would therefore be understandable if the critics were to ask us the question, when you spoke of an age of hope, were you not living in a fool's paradise? Was it not the case that what you said then amounted to nothing more than the wish being further to the thought? And given the seriousness of the situation of the general crisis I've mentioned, I believe that these queries require an honest answer to assist in responding to the question, what is to be done? And surely that honest answer must address the matters of one, whether the political leadership mandated through democratic elections with the task of governing our country has lived up to its systemic responsibilities. And two, whether the major owners of capital in our country, including yourselves, the top 100 companies present here, have discharged their own social responsibilities as such owners of capital. And three, whether enough has been done to achieve concerted action by all relevant stakeholders to address our socio-economic challenges, these having been collectively identified as being important elements of shared national interest. And fourth, whether more could have been done to generate the resources to meet the demands for both sustained economic growth and development in a mixed economy, and therefore the creation of greater national wealth, as well as more equitable sharing of that greater wealth. To state my own response to some of these questions directly, I'd like to say that my answer to them is yes and no. I must therefore explain myself in this regard. First, it is obvious that over the years, progressively since 1994, and that therefore including the years when we were in government, some negative features have emerged in our governing party, the ANC, which the organization itself has recognized, including the disease of the abuse of political power for personal enrichment. Confronted by this reality, the leadership of the movement could not avoid speaking out against the scourge of endemic corruption, the looting of public resources through what it described as tenderpreneurship and other forms of theft of public resources, the so-called state capture, which speaks to the disease of direct control of people in responsible positions in the public sector by particular business interests. And fourth, the drift of the ANC away from the ordinary working people and its historic task and raison d'etre, established over an entire century, of existing solely for the purpose to serve the interests of the people of our country. The ANC itself has spoken up spoken out about such negative features within its own ranks, such as the use of cash to buy members, as well as the abuse of supposedly independent state institutions to advance individual interests. What this means is that all this serves to undermine and weaken the capacity and possibility for the governing political authority to discharge its responsibilities, to ensure national respect for the constitutional and statutory prescripts, to unite the people to act together to address the objectives stated in our Constitution as our fundamental law, and to ensure that the state machinery works to serve the interests of the people as a whole, consistent with the Constitution. Seriously, to provide leadership with regard to addressing the evolving social challenges relating to the entrenchment and development of democracy and human rights, and meeting the needs of the people as exposed by concrete reality and as required in terms of our Bill of Rights. The challenge, therefore, is that one of the features which defines the general crisis I've mentioned is that certainly in the minds of many in our country, our governing authorities are not adequately discharging their responsibility to provide answers about what should be done to achieve the objective of a better life for all and the creation of a people-centered society and a winning nation. A deeply disturbing result of the accumulated negative tendencies I've mentioned is the gradual loss of respect for and the erosion of the authority of the state and government, which are vitally important in terms of leading our nation as a whole. And this cannot but lead to social disorder and instability. And beyond the directly political, it is a matter of common cause among all of us that our country is experiencing, that our economy is experiencing great difficulties. And in this regard, all of us share a common concern that, one, the economic growth rates are far too low, the levels of unemployment are too high, and similarly, the level of inequality is also too high. The first Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Mr. David Lipton, was in our country earlier this year. And regarding all of these matters, this last July, he made some comments with which I agree and said that South Africa is grappling with growth that is too slow to raise average living standards, which is deeply problematic when 1/3 of the working population is effectively excluded from the economy. And he said so far, there's been only limited progress on reforms to remedy that situation. And went on to say, what does this mean? The prospect of falling per capita income and increases in a jobless rate already among the world's highest. And that would spell tough times ahead, particularly given the difficulties facing the global economy. And he said inclusion of the excluded 1/3 of South Africans could and should be a source of strength and dynamism for the generation to come. But now, the cost of insufficient action has reached the critical point. The present trajectory is simply not good enough. What is needed is a fresh and energetic review of South Africa's policies, followed by action, unquote. Excuse me. Naturally, the question arises, what is to be done to respond to all this? In this regard, and thanks to Trevor, Manuel, and others, the National Development Plan says that the key measures of economic success identified in the plan are that South Africa achieves average gross domestic product growth of over 5%, and that by 2030, GDP per capita is more than twice the present level, that export growth has accelerated, income levels have risen above the poverty line for all, inequality has been substantially reduced, and unemployment has been reduced from 25 to 6%. And I'd like to believe that all of us would agree with these objectives. But the challenge we face is to elaborate the necessary plan and program to realize those goals. And in this context, I must make the observation, and apologies to Trevor, that despite all its nationally accepted commendable strengths, the National Development Plan will remain merely a correct vision until a detailed plan is elaborated, accepted by all relevant role players, and actually implemented to accomplish the excellent outcomes indicated in the vision eloquently presented in the NDP. I say this to make the vitally important point that to extricate ourselves from the general crisis I've mentioned, we are faced with the strategic task to agree upon and actually carry out an implementation plan to achieve the objectives mentioned in the NDP. And in this context, a challenging question arises. And this is, have we achieved such a level of national cohesion informed by the pursuit of matters we agree are in the shared national interest that we can in fact agree on and carry out an NDP implementation plan? And in this context, speaking in July last year, the CEO of Anglo-American PLC, Mr. Mark Kutifani, said that to create a competitive South Africa, government, business, and labor must work together, as the editor of the Sunday Times has just said, that there is no other way. That government has a vital role to play in leading, facilitating, and encouraging dialogue to accelerate the NDP's implementation. And he said we must build bridges and find common ground, and do so on the basis of respect and trust. And said the time is right for a national conversation to map out the way forward for South Africa and to provide its people with greater opportunity for a better life by becoming a more mature, modern, competitive, just, and prosperous democracy. And said that our current deep suspicion of each other is simply not sustainable, and is evidence to the world that the miracle of the Rainbow Nation is floundering as it cannot get past self-interest and outdated ideological mantras, unquote. Mr. Kutifani made these comments correctly to reflect on a real challenge that we face. And in this regard, I agree completely with him that without genuine cooperation between government, business, and labor, we are indeed condemned to fail in our efforts to extricate ourselves from the general crisis I've mentioned. We are therefore faced with the task to answer such questions honestly and practically. What should be done to ensure that our government leads the process of achieving agreement by all stakeholders on a realistic NDP implementation plan? What should be done to build bridges and find common ground among the stakeholders on that basis of mutual respect and trust, overcoming the tendency towards exclusive focus on self-interest and attachment to particular ideological dogmas, thus to act in unity on agreed matters of national interest? And what steps should be taken to convene the processes which would result in a national conversation to map out the way forward for South Africa? And obviously, the business community represented here this evening would and must be one of the central players in that national conversation to which Mark Kutifani referred. And in that context, including with regard to overcoming the deep suspicion of each other, I must mention some matters relevant to the perception by at least some among our people, relevant to your conduct, our business community. And I'm certain that you are aware that some in our country have argued that for some time now, that our private sector has embarked on what has been called an investment strike. And in this context, in August last year, the City Press newspaper carried an article entitled "South Africa's Economic Outlook, Bad News and Really Bad News." And among other things, the article said that Stellenbosch University's Economic Management Dean, Stan du Plessis, who painted a bleak picture of the country's immediate prospects, said a big question that had to be answered was why private corporations were not investing in business expansion. And he said while low demand and the absence of skilled labor had been cited as some of the reasons in recent years, the deterioration of the political climate had emerged as a key reason corporations were not investing in growth. And another article published in September last year entitled "South African Firms Hoard Cash in Indictment of the Economy." And that article said that corporates in Africa's most industrialized economy are so negative about future growth prospects that they are sitting with record amounts of cash in the bank, according to the Stanlib Asset Management, South Africa's third largest manager of domestic mutual funds. And it said investment by businesses has stagnated as confidence languishes near its lowest in almost 4 years, and President Jacob Zuma's administration struggles to reignite an economy expanding at the slowest pace since the 2009 recession. And said that companies had 689 billion on deposit in South African banks at the end of June, compared to 671.5 billion rand in November, according to data compiled by Stanlib from the South African Reserve Bank. Unquote. And these articles were published last year. And I do not know what the situation is today, though I would suspect that it has not changed much. I mention all this in the context of what has been said quite correctly, that one of the national challenges we must address is overcoming the deep suspicion of each other. And in this case, the suspicion that, as I've said, as some have said, that the private sector is on an investment strike. And let me once again cite some remarks made by Mark Kutifani, to which I have referred in the past. When he spoke at the Mining Indaba in 2013 in Cape Town, he talked about the social responsibilities of the mining industry, and among others said that the things we do as the mining industry are so important to global society. But the communities where we do business get the rough end of the stick. It is critical to understand how to really engage with communities. We must listen to what the communities want to be and not tell them who to be, unquote. And it was obviously correct that Mr. Kutifani should speak in these terms, underlining the need for our corporate citizens to be sensitive to the national challenges. And significantly, he also said that we each have a responsibility to be a leader, to seek a new future, and to be the first to extend a hand of partnership to those that will develop this brave new world we all want to be part of. And said the job of those who have stewardship of capital is to support society. And that South Africa could meet its challenges once government and the private sector stopped talking past each other, unquote. These comments necessarily put on the national agenda the question, in what ways are those who have stewardship of capital discharging their responsibility to support society? As all of us have seen, the current raging debate about the so-called state capture has brought sharply to the fore questions about the attitude of capital as a whole to the resolution of our country's national challenges, and whether the drive to make money at all costs means that capital is ready even to subvert the constitutional order. In other words, to what extent do our corporate chiefs share the view expressed by Mark Kutifani that the job of those who have stewardship of capital is to support society? And the central point I'm making is that obviously some of the strategic national challenges we face are that together we ensure that our economy grows at high sustainable rates, that we reduce the levels of unemployment, we reduce the levels of inequality, we ensure that business plays its role in this regard, we encourage government, business and labor to work effectively together to achieve the objectives identified in the National Development Plan, and that we agree on an implementation plan to ensure the realization of those objectives detailed in the NDP. And the reality is that if we do not do these things and also fail to address the political challenges we face, the general crisis I've mentioned will get even deeper and more intractable. In that situation, it would be inevitable that social instability will increase as the people take to the streets to express their grievances and advance their demands, as the university students have been doing. Added to this is the danger that such widespread instability would be accompanied by the destruction of property and the loss of life. Obviously, there would be instances of serious confrontation between the protesters and the state security organs. And in this context, we dare not forget what happened in Marikana in 2012, about which Mark Kutifani said correctly that Marikana was a symptom of a much greater issue that needs us to engage and work together to find collective solutions. Any failure on our part successfully to address our political, economic, and socio-economic challenges cannot but result in a vicious circle which would lead to a further deepening of the general crisis and therefore a further entrenchment of social instability. It may be that some might think that what I've said is somewhat alarmist. However, my view is that we should err on the side of caution rather than take comfort in an attitude of complacency. In addition to what I've said concerning what we should do, I'd like to add two more important initiatives. Last March, the Constitutional Court delivered its well-known judgment on Gandla. And of great importance in this regard were the detailed observations the court made about what it means to govern a constitutional democracy. It would have therefore served our country very well if the political parties which serve in our national legislature had discussed these observations to ensure that all relevant institutions operate as they should, as required by our Constitution. And these include the political parties themselves, the legislature or legislatures, the executive, and the state institutions, including the Chapter 9 bodies. If Parliament had done what I suggest, honestly and seriously, I believe that this would have made the strategic intervention we need to pull the country out of the unhappy political situation in which it is, and to put us on a course to achieve the quality governance system we visualized when we adopted our Constitution 20 years ago. Further, again last March, a number of our foundations jointly issued a call to engage in a national dialogue. They said that the dialogue would aim at mobilizing South Africans across racial, class, gender, rural and urban, as well as party political divides, to reflect on the journey traveled since 1994, and more critically, to promote a national consensus for the future, unquote. And I strongly suggest that all of us should support this important initiative and therefore encourage the foundations concerned to move with some urgency to enable all our people to engage one another in an open and inclusive and comprehensive process, out of which should emerge a national consensus about what we should do together to address all of the challenges our country faces. I've argued that our country is immersed in a general crisis. Fortunately, we have not as yet reached a tipping point when the country becomes ungovernable, with disastrous consequences for black and white, rich and poor, and young and old alike. And this clearly is an eventuality we must avoid at all costs. And I'm certain that as a people, we have the capacity to achieve this result. And we must therefore act now and do the right thing, because time is not on our side. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Mr. Thabo Mbeki. A man who was president in a time when one actually had to be presidential. These days, some people say anyone can be president, and tomorrow we will know if that is true. I actually had, Mr. Mbeki, I had prepared an introduction for you. Because unfortunately we couldn't book a praise singer this evening. Zolani Mkiva was unfortunately not available. I don't know if you guys want to hear this is my, I don't sing well, but this is my attempt at praise singing.
Nkulu yakwaMbeki Hlamene gwela yokakhale ngwevu yakwaMadiba Chama Chamangila wajamela majalaha ajekule jaju bota kwephenje yasemazizini bayile nkundla yama-Afrika. Viva Thabo Mbeki, long live Thabo Mbeki, long live. Viva Thabo Mbeki, halala. Yeah.
I think that means very well done. I always wanted to do that since I first saw, I think it was Madiba's inauguration in '94, where Zolani Mkiva came on that stage. I don't know if you guys remember this. He was in his leopard skins, he was in the eNCA, the porcupines, Prince Charles sitting here at the front row, the whole world watching. He comes there.
Viva Madiba, viva Talipunga, Holidata, halala. Yeah.
And they had this close-up of Prince Charles. I swear to God, he shot himself. I just, like, if Camilla had been next to him, she would have been like, But she wasn't. She was in the stables at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, you can follow our former president on Twitter under the handle TweedandPipe23. You can't, it's not him, I checked. The Sunday Times Business Leader of the Year is the ultimate accolade, with a recipient being being decided by CEOs of the Sunday Times top 100 companies from the previous year. Now, we have some illustrious past winners. Christo Wiese, Johan van Zyl, Michael Jordan, Phuthuma Nhleko, Johan Rupert, Brian Joffe, Graham McKay, Whitey Basson, Adrian Gore, and Maria Ramos, to name a few. I just wanted to share with you an interesting fact I recently learned about Maria Ramos from a former Minister of Finance. She has many degrees, Maria, but most of the universities she got them from could not manage to put all of her names on the diplomas. Maria da Conceição dos Neves Calha Ramos. These are challenging letters to fit all of them onto a university degree. And you didn't know that. And another interesting fact is, that I learned from a former minister, is that she can't swim. Which is why Thabo never put her in charge of Portnet. It was Transnet. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's recipient of the Business Leader of the Year is a man who needs a bit of good news. That drum roll is going to be a little bit early because I have a few more things to say about him. So can you hold him? Thank you. Someone you've all heard of multiple times, particularly in the last week. When all around us were being captured, this man managed to avoid capture by both state and statement. While our last finance minister was just a weekend special, this one is for real. He's the finance minister you take home to your mom. The one you put in your Facebook profile picture. The one you want to spend the rest of your life with. He's locked up Treasury as tight as he's locked up our hearts. South Africa will never be the same again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for that drum roll. The Sunday Times Business Leader of the Year for 2016 is awarded to there it is. Mr. Robin Conrad. Please, with Minister Gordon and Bongani Sikogo, editors of the Sunday Times, come to the stage. Mr. Gordon is being presented with a certificate and a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. Will you be enjoying that, Minister? No. Will you be declaring it? Yes.
The program director doesn't like to be called one, but I thought he should be politically correct, sometimes. The CEO of Times Media, the editor of Sunday Times, Mr. Sikoko, former President Thabo Mbeki, ministers, former ministers, leaders of the labor movement, honorable mayors of Tshwane and Johannesburg. You can see air conditioning and I don't get along too well. Leaders of the business community, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not quite sure why they keep calling you captains. But you should perhaps change the nomenclature a little bit. But firstly, thank you very much for this award. I don't see this as a personal award. If you put me in charge of one of your businesses, I'm 67, so I'm sure I'm not hunting for a CEO position right now. You might not quite get the sort of business leader you're looking for, but nonetheless, I'm, on behalf of all of the people I think who need the credit, absolutely humbled that you've actually gone outside of your normal way of doing things and thought outside of the box, given our current circumstances, and both good fortunes ahead and, of course, challenges. Good fortunes don't come without challenges. So, on behalf, firstly, of our Deputy Minister, Kabisi Jonas, our Director General, Lungisa Fuzile, and his colleagues. And then, ladies and gentlemen, in January this year, I know you're wondering why is he here? He's not the protector. You know him in many, many other and different capacities. He's here because in January this year, the President asked the two of us, one from the government side, one from the business side, to lead a series of initiatives in which many of you have taken part. Initiatives that would start, if you like, normalizing South Africa after the events of December last year. Secondly, inspire confidence in our country so that it is not just business, but people of South Africa, all 55 million people, begin to see the benefits of that. And thirdly, to come up with concrete initiatives which would demonstrate that the business community is not here, inverted commas, just to make money, but we are now becoming a more proactive and more engaged and, if you like, a more activist community. In the last 9 or 10 months, Jabu Mabuza and I and a whole lot of people from your side and from the government side, and indeed from all three labor federations, have worked extremely hard to try to generate this confidence, try to build on what we are as an optimistic nation. And in some ways, we tried to reflect that in the medium-term budget policy statement when we talked about hope and resilience, notwithstanding that the rest of the pages actually do tell a story which says that we have difficulties, but we don't have impossible difficulties. And that if we get certain ingredients right, which is what we and others are trying to do, then we would actually find ourselves on a different but better path. And so the lesson of this past period is that we do need to build our social contract again, or rather build on it, that we've demonstrated that partnership is the key with labor and with government. But partnership in name and in boardrooms is not enough. We've also moved to a stage where many of you have become activists, like me, an ANC activist for many years, and I'm sure there are many others in the audience as well. And that kind of activism and awareness of our situation, which will enable us to be contributors to enhancing the national interest, to making sure that government's programs to implement the NDP are enhanced, are reinforced, and that new creative types of partnerships begin to give meaning in actual terms and in the actual lives, as Amartya Sen would say, of the 55 million people that we are talking about. It's also, I think, fair that we recognize that in the world today, and there are lots of people who are writing about this and talking about this, that one of the factors that's damaging society and social cohesion and promoting some of the things that we are talking about here, i.e. corruption and rent-seeking, is greed. So there's this book by the two Skidelskis, father and son, which says, how much is enough? And it's a question that I think perhaps we need to put up on the wall somewhere and ask ourselves, how much is enough for me? what is it that I could actually share. And our message throughout has been that as South Africa, we need inclusive growth. We need growth that actually involves all of our people. More importantly, given our history, we require inclusive transformation. But transformation that is based on the values of the Constitution and on the best values that are taught us by our parents or by our religious past or present. And that is what will actually hold us in good stead at the end of the day. And for Nick's benefit, I'm actually not the rogue or the rogue unit. There are many people who have suffered loss of jobs, damage to their families, just by being labeled in a particular way. Ivan Pillay, Johan van Lockerenberg, Peter Richer, Adrian Lakay, amongst others. And I think it's important that we do everything possible to make sure that at the end of the day, justice is in fact done. But let me conclude. Let me conclude by thanking Jabu Mabuza and his team of CEOs for the excellent efforts that they've made, for the innovative way in which we've been able to work together, and above all, the Small Business Fund, the so-called YES program that Colin Coleman and others are leading, the investment initiative that Sim Shabalala is leading, and then of course the key one is, and the ladies are going to get tired of me just now, is the fact that ratings agencies visit us next week. And so part of this initiative that we were asked to lead was to do whatever we can to galvanize all of our positivity in order to ensure that, Mr. Editor, we don't get into that junk state. And South Africans can just win a cricket match in Australia. I'm sure they'll do better at other sport after losing to the Barbarians in London. So if we use that resilience, and if we don't forget that we are a very hopeful people, I'm sure that we can try to get the best results possible, even in a difficult situation. But once again, on behalf of all of the people I've mentioned, we are very humbled by your acknowledgement, and thank you very much.
Are your greatest life achievements?
Yeah, people like us often don't talk about those sorts of things, but being an activist for the last 40 odd years, seeing the fruits of activism and the kind of sacrifices that both our seniors made and various generations of activists, including ourselves, being borne out in the Constitution and the kind of values that we propagate today in a working democracy, in actually meaningfully changing people's lives, is not my achievement, but it's a huge achievement for all those who actually believed that democracy is possible and that a better life is possible as well. So it's been a great privilege to be part of that process.
Who or what motivates you to succeed?
Exactly what I said. I think we became active like hundreds of thousands of other activists, motivated by principles in the Freedom Charter. In particular, the first line, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. But more importantly, motivated by a sense of justice. People at a day-to-day level. And it's a great joy to see, as I said already, ideas being converted into real-life propositions. The challenge, of course, is that 20 years doesn't eradicate centuries of difficulties. And so there's harder work to do, and there are more risks as we go ahead, as the rest of the world is learning, that you could have small groups of people appropriating benefits for themselves as opposed to the wider group of citizens, and all those in the faith community, in civil society, in government, in business and in labor, who believe that we need a shared and prosperous future for all South Africans, would very much like to see the fulfillment of the wider set of objectives that benefit all citizens.
What do you think is the secret to business success?
I would probably make a very poor business person. But in today's world, I would imagine, apart from business acumen and the ability to innovate and be agile and be responsive and seize opportunities, and over and above that, I suppose, look at the bottom line, which most CEOs are actually judged by. There's another side to the world as well. A side which says, what does business contribute to sustainable development goals, to a more sustainable planet? How do you not only think about today, but how do you think about tomorrow? And then more narrowly, in the South African context, how do we contribute in a very active way, as we've been saying in the MTBPS, to better prospects for our young people, better prospects for the poor, a change in our agricultural situation or a change in our industrial situation? And how do we make South Africa not just survive the current period and cope with what we have as the structure of our economy, but using business innovation, skills and commitment to actually innovate our economy into a new stage and create the platform for the next 20 or 30 years as well. And that will then say that this generation has actually left something better and a stronger platform for future generations.
What does it mean to you to win this award, particularly because you've been nominated by South Africa's business leaders?
I think it exemplifies the fact that our wider message is now resonating with the business community. The message which says we are all in this together, that it's up to us to change South Africa for the better, not just for business people, but for all constituencies. It's a recognition that we need an inclusive form of transformation where all South Africans feel that they are part not only of a process, but part of the beneficiaries of the process as well. And an indication that we have a commitment to solving some of the structural issues in our economy. But if you take it at a plain and simple level, it's about creating mutual hope. It's about creating mutual optimism. It's about reinforcing each other's strengths and resources so that we can, in fact, deliver upon the promise that South Africa holds. So I'm very grateful for the award, but I don't see this as a personal thing. I think it's a huge acknowledgement by the business community that we are in this together and that collectively we have the will to change South Africa into a better place.
What advice would you give to young business people today?
Have a conscience. Don't only think about money. Money is important, but you are the pioneers of a new stage in our economic development. And as pioneers in this new stage, yes, innovation is required.